Thanks, Ashley. And I will. We're going to move inside the house now and talk a little bit more about storage of apples once you've gotten them from the farm or the grocery store, wherever you decide to purchase those. So let me get my screen shared. We'll also talk about preservation of those and preparation of the fruit as well. And I am the Family and Consumer Sciences agent here in Gilmer County. So first, let's talk a little bit about nutrition. Apples offer a variety of nutrients that are beneficial to our diets, including vitamins, minerals, and fiber for our digestive health. They're naturally sweet and vary in taste depending on the variety chosen. Ashley mentioned a lot about the different varieties that we have here in Georgia. And how their flavor profiles are different depending on the variety that you choose. And also depending on what you're preparing and what taste flavor you want may also determine which apple you choose in your recipes. So what counts as a serving of apples? Well, a 1 cup serving, it's recommended that adults get 1.5 to 2 cups of fruit per day. So a 1 cup serving is a half of a large or about a 3 1/4 inch in diameter apple, which is about the size of a baseball, maybe a little bit larger than a baseball, or one small apple, which is about 2 1/4 inches in diameter, or a little bit smaller than a tennis ball, or 1 cup of sliced or chopped fruit. Selection and storage. We definitely want to select fruit that is firm and free of any bruises or broken skin that causes them to spoil. They can get bacteria into and harmful microorganisms into the fruit that will spoil our fruit faster. Store apples in your home in a cool, dark place. Putting them in the refrigerator will extend the shelf life, but as Ashley mentioned many times, you'll definitely want to eat those yummy apples quickly, so you may not have time to store them for very long. If you do store them in the refrigerator, keep them away from any raw meats, poultry, or seafood. You don't want any cross-contamination with any bacteria that may be in those products, especially for any produce that you want to eat raw. Check for signs of rotting often. They say, one bad apple can spoil the bunch, which definitely can happen. So check any apples that you have stored in kind of a cluster or in a basket or a container. Check those often for any rotten ones and be sure to discard those once you notice signs of rotting. As always, before consuming any produce, you want to rinse in cool water before you eat your produce. Apples go through what we call an oxidation reaction when you actually chop into the apple or slice the apple open. Once the flesh encounters oxygen, it goes through that oxidation reaction, which causes some browning, what we see as browning. To prevent this, you can either soak or rinse cut fruit in lemon juice or soak it in an ascorbic acid solution. This is often what you find in pre-sliced apples that you may get from the grocery store or your favorite fast food restaurant that serves sliced apples. And it does give it kind of a different flavor, but that's generally what we find in those apples. It's helping to prevent them from browning. A couple of different methods that we can use for preservation include drying, freezing, and canning. And we'll talk about those each individually here in just a second, and how we can use the apples that we may have gotten from a local apple orchard in some of our recipes. So drying removes moisture from food. This slows down the action of enzymes that cause the food to spoil. This process uses warm, dry conditions to remove moisture from foods. There are several ways that we can dry foods. Sun drying, it's often done in the western United States where they have much drier air. We don't recommend that. Here in the South, while we do have very warm conditions sometimes, we don't have very dry conditions. We have normally very moist, humid conditions. You can also dry foods in the oven. Those require several process steps and are a little harder than what the most common method is to use a food dehydrator that you would find at a hardware store or at Walmart or somewhere. So kind of quickly, in drying apples, peel and core your apples. Be sure that they are rinsed beforehand. Cut those into 1/8 inch thick slices or rings, whichever you or your family prefer. You do want to treat them with a solution with either your lemon juice or ascorbic acid or fruit juice dip, and dry those, lay those out and dry those on on your drying racks. Takes about 6 to 12 hours for drying time, depending on the size of your slices and how they're processing. So just to give you kind of a heads up on that it's not a very quick process, so it may take several hours to actually get apple slices dried. Freezing is another method of food preservation. It's one of the easiest and most convenient ways to extend the life of fruits. Cold slows the growth of microorganisms that slows food spoilage. Some things to consider when we are freezing: think about the packaging containers that you're using. Most common are plastic bags. Some folks may use plastic containers or glass jars. You do want to avoid using any cardboard containers or any commercial containers that may have held other foods, as they may not get a good seal. You want something that doesn't allow anything to come in, so that it doesn't give any off flavors to your foods. And that they're also easy to seal, that your containers are easy to seal and do get an airtight seal. Consider, the preparation of your foods. Again, you want to treat foods with your ascorbic acid solution or your fruit juice to prevent the browning. Or you may consider using a fruit pack, which it may be a syrup pack that will again help to extend the life of your food and prevent that browning. Be sure with any foods that you put into a freezer to label those. You want to make sure that you put the date that the foods have gone into the freezer, as well as what food they are. You never know. You may open your freezer months from now and find something that may be a little darker in color and you're not quite sure what it is. Another great hint or tip too is to record the quantity of the foods that you're using or the foods that you're storing for later use. You may pull out those apples to use in a recipe in a month, and if you write down that you've put in a cup for freezing, it'll be a little easier to know how much you need to pull out. And we also recommend storing them in sizes that you're most common to use. You may not want to put an entire bushel of apples in one container if you're not going to use that in one sitting later. So break those down into smaller, more usable sizes. The next method that we'll talk about is canning. These are photos from a canning class that we held last year, pre-COVID times, with one of our local apple orchards. This is probably one of the most famous ways that we like to preserve our apples, by making jams and jellies, especially apple butter, with some of our local apples. We can preserve apples using the canning method in a variety of ways: sliced apples, jellies, apple butter, apple sauce. There are some recommendations for the types of apples that you want to use in certain recipes. For sliced apples, if you're using those maybe later on as a pie filling or maybe as just for eating, we do recommend to choose apples that are juicy and crisp. Apples that are sweet and tart are going to be your best bet for flavor later on. In making apple butter and apple sauce, the preferred varieties include the Jonathan, the Winesap, the Stamen, the Golden Delicious, and the McIntosh. For applesauce, we recommend using apples that are sweet, juicy, and crisp. Or, as Ashley mentioned earlier, for a tart flavor, you can add in a tart apple to your flavor base to add in a little more flavor. So the great debate: what's the difference between apple butter and apple sauce? They are very similar, but they are also very different. Apple butter we use as a spread for biscuits or toast in the morning, and it is a firmer product. The process of that includes more sugar and also more spices to make the flavor of our apple butter. Applesauce is a much thinner or not as firm of a product, so and it usually doesn't use quite as much sugar. And some folks will actually preserve unsweetened applesauce. If the apples are sweet enough, you may not need the additional sugar in your applesauce. And some folks do also add in some spices to that as well. So what will you do with your apples? The possibilities are endless, whether you're using them for a topping for a salad, making apple butter or apple sauce, or even putting them in your favorite baked good. They can be a great addition to your next meal. For more information on more specific ways to preserve food, because each method is a little different, contact your local extension office, or you can find more information at the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And here is my contact information if you'd like to contact me with any further questions.